So the first person is Cheryl Abbott, so I'll invite Cheryl to come speak, and then it will be Barbara Agar.
Every Saturday morning for many years, my family and our dog visit our local Point Pelee National Park. In March 2007, following our routine park visit, I found a tick attached on my abdomen. The tick already appeared engorged. I remembered hearing mention of Lyme disease in the park's tick population, but we were not aware of the potential dangers for our family. 3 weeks later, I was sick with the worst flu-like symptoms. I went to the doctor and told him about the Point Pelee visit, resulting in the tick bite and the tick removal. I requested a Lyme test because of my symptoms and my concerns. My ELISA results were negative. My doctor was confident that I was not infected because I didn't have a rash and the negative ELISA test. At this time, I was uneducated about Lyme, but I have since learned my family doctor was uneducated as well. Although my initial symptoms eased somewhat, I have never felt well since that bite. Over the following months and years, I noticed increased fatigue, sinus infections, bronchitis, ringing in my ears, vertigo, light sensitivity, sound sensitivity, 2 surgeries, joint and muscle pain, bright lights in my right eye, skin lesions, hair loss, and many other symptoms. I began doing everything I could to strengthen my immune system. After numerous office visits, my doctor referred me to different specialists, including an ear, nose, and throat doctor, pulmonologist, neurologist, and an internal medicine doctor. It was found that I have asthma, 2 leaky heart valves, and acid reflux, but none of their specialists had a diagnosis for my multiple debilitating symptoms. After my increased doctor's visits and my insistence of something being wrong, my GP threw up his hands and told me he couldn't find anything physically wrong and suggested an antidepressant. When I insisted something was wrong and we hadn't found it yet, he became angry. I was told he would not send me to another specialist, and I realized he was giving up on me. This forced me to start looking for an answer on the U.S. side of the border. A Michigan ear, nose, and throat doctor diagnosed vertigo. A Michigan neurologist discovered multiple white matter foci on a brain MRI, yet no one seemed concerned about what they had found. My symptom list was increasing, and I had lost my sense of smell and taste, and I was losing the vision in my right eye. During this time, our family dog was sick, and our veterinarian discovered our German Shepherd had Lyme, and it was confirmed with a 10-minute blood test. This is when I knew I needed to be retested for Lyme, and after the second negative ELISA test in Ontario, I turned to the internet to find out if there was a reason why I would test negative if I did have Lyme. I discovered the controversy and the symptom list on CanLyme's website containing all of my symptoms. I wanted to rule out Lyme, but felt I could not accurately do so in Canada. I found an infectious disease doctor in Michigan who specialized in Lyme, and he ordered the standard Western blot from LabCorp, and it came back as a strong positive. But it was also positive for Bartonella and toxoplasmosis as well. This was in August of 2011, 4.5 years after my known tick bite. I began treatment immediately through my Michigan doctor. When I told my family doctor in Ontario about the results, he referred me to a local infectious disease specialist. This specialist, after reviewing my faxed test results, phoned me at home and refused to see me because my Ontario tests were negative. I had 3 infectious diseases, and the infectious disease doctor in Canada would not see me. Unfortunately, this was not the last time I was told by Ontario specialists they would not see me again after learning about my U.S. diagnosis. I have been dismissed by a rheumatologist I saw for severe joint pain, a dermatologist for skin lesions, and the neurologist. My third MRI showed 28 brain lesions, 4 of them deep. The Canadian neurologist told me that it was not MS, but Lyme was questionable, and he actually said, "I don't have a diagnosis for you, and I don't want to see you again." 28 brain lesions, and a neurologist can't diagnose me and won't see me again? I don't know what else I could have done to get an accurate diagnosis. I did everything right. Now I realize the guidelines doctors must adhere to are flawed. In a recent conversation with my family doctor, he stated there is no way he would ever take on the college by treating patients with undetermined test results in Ontario. He would only test with a positive result. We are not suffering from mass hysteria. We are suffering from mass neglect.
Thank you very much, Cheryl.
Thank you. Did I make it under 5?
You did.
I was thinking really fast.
No, it was fine. Okay, so I will invite Barbara, I believe it's Agar. And then after that, we'll hear from Sue Aldous.
My name is Barbara Agar. I'm 52 years old. I was diagnosed with Lyme disease in May of 2013. I'm in my 3rd year of treatment for Lyme disease and 2 co-infections, Babesia and Bartonella, under the care of Dr. McShane in Plattsburgh, New York. First of all, I have to tell you that I was always a very positive, happy person and active and involved in many activities and sports prior to becoming ill. I could go on in great length about every single illness and the story of my life for the last 25 years. My illness spans from at least 1991, thank you, when I was first unable to work. But I had begun to have health issues for quite a few years prior to that. I relapsed once in 2002 and then again in 2013. In February of 2013, I had what I call my stroke-like event, and I have never been the same since. Prior to this day, in February of 2013, I hadn't really taken notice of the increasing ringing in my ears and the hearing loss, my lopsided gait, walking into doorways, jamming my left foot into the floor and stumbling as I walked, feeling like the floor suddenly tilted to the one side, my inability to retain anything that I read, and the fact that I was reading more and more slowly all the time. I can read now. And not throw up. Not to mention the ever-present joint and muscle pain and the annoying tremor and head pain. And these were just a fraction of the ever-growing list of symptoms that I had. I could no longer work as a pediatric intensive care nurse. My gait became very unsteady, my balance was off, and my short-term memory is out the window. I became disoriented while driving and did not recognize familiar places, and I had to ask my daughter where I was so I could make it home. During the summer of 2013, while I waited for my first appointment in September with Dr. McShane in New York, my neurological status deteriorated, increased spasticity of my arms and legs at night, jerky movements when I walked, my body vibrated all over. I got the positive Western blot back, and the Centre for Diseases Control says that I have Lyme disease, but nobody in Canada wanted to hear about it. After 3 years of treatment, I realize it is a slow process and an uphill battle, but I'm making great progress, especially in the last 6 months since I started an anti-malarial drug, which is being pulsed with artemisinin. Yes, I am here to help develop a national strategy for the prevention and treatment of Lyme disease in Canada. Yes, I am here so that others will get their Lyme disease diagnosed early and won't have to suffer the long-term effects of this infection. Yes, I am here to fight so that these people will get proper, prompt treatment in Canada according to the ILADS guidelines and won't have to pay out of pocket, use their RRSPs, and sell their homes just to finance treatment. But I am not completely altruistic. Yes, I am also here for me today. Things are critical for me and my family, and now we need financial support to pay for the treatment because we can't afford to wait. For the entire length of my illness, I have nursed myself back to health without the help of the government or the insurance companies. These expensive treatments that I've had were never covered by any of them. When I was being worked up for chronic fatigue syndrome back in 1991, I remarked to the young resident that I was impressed with her open-mindedness to the existence of chronic fatigue syndrome, which was at the time being rejected by most of the medical community. And I asked her how she came to be this way. She told me that when she was a medical student, a woman came to talk to all the students about her experience being sick for 30 years and never being listened to, and finally was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. I remember going home and saying to my husband-to-be that day, "Can you imagine being sick for 30 years and not being believed? Never would I have imagined that I would be waiting almost as long to finally be heard. Here we are today." I have put all my negative experience with all the doctors behind me, those that never believed me, thought I was depressed or a hypochondriac, those infectious disease specialists who refused my doctor's referrals, 3 of them, because I had Lyme disease, and those that had no time for my complex issues and multiple symptoms. I found the doctors who were able to deal with my current issues and avoided those that refused to acknowledge the existence of Lyme disease. In that way, I was able to save a great deal of energy for the purpose of healing myself and focusing on the treatment that I require. Coming to this conference today is very traumatic for me because it is reminiscent. I didn't know what kind of crowd it would be, and it's reminiscent. Yeah, but you never know who you're going to bump into. And I said, it's reminiscent of all the negative doctor's encounters I've had in the past. I'm hoping to meet like-minded people that are vested in moving forward on this framework. I'm on edge, on the defensive, and ready for a fight, which is, and I don't want to be, but I'm afraid to leave here disappointed and feeling left on my own once again. I feel like, after hearing the intro, that we're headed in the right direction, and we just have to work together, take down all the walls, and move forward.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, so I'll invite Sue Aldous, and then we'll hear from Angie Lara.
I'm Sue Aldous from the Parksville, BC Lyme Disease Support Group. I've had Lyme disease for over 3 decades and have been in treatment for almost half of that time. Oh, God. Within a year of being diagnosed, I became a founding member of a support group, which quickly morphed into an awareness support group, and this became my passion. Since then, I have founded several Lyme disease support and awareness groups, both online and those that meet in person. Over the years, I have communicated with hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of Lyme disease patients. And I have to tell you that the things that we have in common is staggering for a disease that's considered hard to get, difficult to diagnose, and easy to treat. Typically, prior to getting sick, most were active and often quite successful in their chosen careers. About half got sick over a number of years, and the other half hit the proverbial brick wall. On average, we see over 20 doctors, have a variety of tests that generally lead to no answers. As a whole, we look pretty healthy, and our concerns are disregarded. We are told that we need to lose a little weight, start a hobby, or get some counseling and we'll be fine. Unfortunately, that does not reflect our realities. Because we look healthy and our test results tend to fall within normal parameters, we quickly lose medical support, which eventually trickles down to our families and caregivers. Before we know it, we are told that we are a burden and should just get over it. Without medical support, it's impossible to get home care, disability pensions, or any other type of support that should be available to Canadians that become seriously ill. Many of us have been told that we're wasting medical resources, sometimes even being yelled at by doctors for wasting their time. Wasting their time? How many times have we waited months and months to see yet another specialist, and an hour or so in their waiting room, and we're wasting their time? My heart breaks when I think of the number of children with congenital Lyme disease or those that contracted it playing outside. These kids spend their childhood in bed, fighting to continue their education and reveling at those rare days they get to attend a class. I'm horrified when people present with an obvious bite site, an embedded tick, or even a full bullseye rash, and their doctor turns them away with talk of ringworm, spider bites, or being told not to worry. There's no Lyme disease here. Some of these people manage to get a second opinion and the necessary antibiotics. But many tend to believe what their professionals tell them, and they take no further action. Sadly, All too often, I hear back from them later that they have these odd symptoms as they enter the world of chronic Lyme disease and its numerous co-infections. Due to the way this disease is handled in this country, we are a drain on the medical system. We tend to earn little or no income and therefore pay minimal taxes. Any spare money goes to health care. Collectively, we have a negative effect on the economy. But as you will see, this is not by choice. It is critical that training for frontline doctors and medical support personnel become a priority. The public needs to be informed about the risks, prevention, and what to do if they get bit. Canada must invest in and find the best forms of diagnostic treatments and support for those with this horrible disease. We need a made in Canada approach rather than following the status quo that is sending people into a debilitating life of misery. Our disability system needs an update to reflect the often slow decline of a Lyme patient. All too many people did not realize soon enough that they needed to apply for this. And also the process is so complicated by design, but people with chronic Lyme disease are so cognitively challenged. Simple tasks become complicated, which makes the disability application process nearly impossible to successfully get through. We need compassion, understanding, support, and a variety of treatment options. But more than anything, we need and want for no one else to become chronically sick because of lack of awareness. Finding a doctor in your area that knows more about Lyme disease than you do should not be harder than winning the lottery. Thank you.
Angie Lara, and then we'll hear from Jennifer.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for understanding. My name is Angie Lara. I'm from Somerstown, Ontario, just east of Cornwall. Here's my story. My dreams before Lyme. Full-time teaching position, small house in the country, humanitarian aid, children, financial stability. In 2012, my dreams started to unfold. Initial symptoms, unexplainable swollen right knee, still today, unexplainable swollen right leg. Like everybody else, 5 orthopedic surgeons over 4 years. My diagnosis at that point is suspected reasons: athletic injury, slight torn meniscus, autoimmune response in the body. New symptoms start to arise. Medication and procedures that were done then: anti-inflammatories, cortisone shots, aspirations of the knees on so many occasions, rest, MRI, meniscal tear surgery, maybe that'll help. Physiotherapy, that was out of pocket. First, rheumatologist. Saw a right knee hot, swollen with synovitis, rheumatoid arthritis. Routine blood work, prednisone, sulfasalazine, methotrexate, naproxen, Vimovo, the list goes on. These are the Coles Notes version. I adopted an autoimmune disorder diet to help, and then my first red flag. The rheumatologist said, "Have you ever been bit by a tick before?" My response: "I have no idea. I've never even seen one, but I camp all over Ontario every summer." He ordered the Lyme serology by ELISA in 2013. No surprise, the results were negative. New symptoms arose, including right ankle effusion, right groin pain, flare-up, swelling, hospitalization, on IV antibiotics. Decided to try a homeopath. She said I had a bacterial infection caused by a bug bite. $5,000 worth of treatment, but I discontinued due to lack of funds, support, and dismissal of diagnosis by my rheumatologist. Got another opinion and got diagnosed with seronegative arthritis and was told I should go on biologic, which are thousands and thousands of dollars and wouldn't be covered for me. My new symptoms included nausea, weight loss. I lost 35 pounds over a year and a half. Anemia, general sweats, flushing, chills, fever, digestive issues, poor appetite, sinus pain, musculoskeletal muscle twitching. Then saw a gynecologist and a general surgeon. Suspected endometriosis or cancer. Right groin lymph node biopsy. It was benign. And that doctor, who was amazing, says, you know, I think this is something to do with whatever's going on in your immune system. Finally saw a naturopath out of pocket, and she suspected a bacterial infection, Lyme disease co-infections due to that. I had the Western blot. She put me on immune and detoxification support, herbal medicines, and some nutritional adjustments. I had some relief from sinus symptoms and fatigue, but I also felt like I was finally being heard. The Western blot, positive for Borrelia burgdorferi. I can't even say it, but I know I have it. And Babesia duncani. I saw a medical doctor out of the U.S., of course, as you all know, out of pocket, and was also clinically diagnosed with Bartonella. Thank you. Medication and procedure, antibiotic treatment with complementary therapies, support from naturopath, and dietary adjustments. A whole approach. My symptoms are slowly resolving. My sinus pain is gone. My post-nasal drainage is going away. My fevers are gone. I have no more chills, and my energy is slowly increasing. And the inflammation is very, very slowly decreasing. 1 year of treatment, no more flare-ups or hospital visits in the last year. My new dreams. Education for Canadian doctors on recognition of bacterial infections at Lyme. Oh, and I lost a slide. And the other one was support, financial support for all of those who are paying out of pocket. I'd like to leave you with one thing. I can do things you cannot. You can do things I cannot. But together we can do great things. And I really hope that that's where we go with this conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angie. Okay, so we'll hear now from Jennifer Armstrong and then Nicolas Assoun. Over to Jennifer.
Thank you, everybody, for coming out and sharing your amazing stories. Hi, Allison. I see a lot of faces of people I know. Part of that is because I'm a physician, and I'm crazy enough to treat Lyme in Ontario, but that kind of evolved. I started off as an environmental physician, which meant I looked at the big picture. I looked at food allergies, chemical sensitivities, toxic metals, and if I had patients that weren't getting better, I started realizing maybe I had Lyme patients. And my first Lyme patient that I diagnosed before I even became an environmental physician was back in 1991 when I was working in Niagara Falls. And I don't know why I ordered a Lyme test on her, but she was positive. She had acute arthritis in almost all the joints of her body, postpartum. And so I had to look it up in a book. And, you know, there wasn't much on Lyme in 1991. So the story was you treat it for a month on IV antibiotics. So she went to emergency every day and got IV antibiotics and got completely better in 1 month. But guess what happened after I stopped? It came back. So I sent her to see an infectious disease doctor in Toronto, who's actually in environmental medicine. He's our arch enemy. And he said, post-Lyme syndrome, post-Lyme arthritis. And I wish I'd known more about it back then to treat her longer. So in the meantime, I learned environmental medicine. I come back and I start getting complicated patients. And I had learned to send the blood test down to IGeneX because I was not getting positive tests in Ontario, even though I got that one positive way back. And I started investigating, why am I not getting positive tests? And one of the reasons, I don't know, do you guys understand why you're not getting positive tests in Ontario? It's because they took out the significant bands for you to be tested by, because they used to use those protein bands to make a Lyme vaccine, which failed. And so because of that, we're not very easily getting positive tests in Canada. And so the infectious disease doctors here they go, oh, we don't know what test to believe anymore, even though you can have a positive test with IGeneX by CDC criteria. They will not recognize it. Their main theme is they throw it in the garbage and they say, we don't believe this lab because it's a for-profit lab. So those are the words that I'm tired of hearing. And I'm probably crazy. I don't really advertise that I practice seeing Lyme patients. I'll treat a patient for Lyme if they come in for something else and we happen to find out they have Lyme. It would be inhumane not to treat them. Our biggest problem is it's really hard for me to get IV antibiotics. The hospital will not put PICC lines in for me, so we have to send them up to Arnprior to get PICC lines put in, and that can take 30 days to 60 days to get a PICC line. But I find we get really good results when we treat Lyme patients because we're treating the whole person. We're treating every possible thing that could be making that person sick. We may be taking them off gluten. We may be taking them off other food allergies. We may be detoxifying them and making sure their house is clean. They're not living in a moldy house. You can't get better if you live in a moldy house. So we look at the big picture. And I noticed that neurologically, these patients will have really weird symptoms. They may have, normally in medicine we're taught that a resting tremor is Parkinson's, but they may have a tremor when they're moving. And the neurologists say, oh, that's fake. They'll tell my patient, you're faking that tremor. And they come to me crying, and I know they're not. These people, you guys aren't faking it. Like, who would want to fake being this sick? But that's how doctors in their ivory towers think of things. And if you look at the statistics, Jim Wilson taught me this. In Scotland, they've had like 1,000 times increase of Lyme in the last 10 years. So they started a task force of doctors working with scientists. So we really need to do that here. But the other reason I got interested in Lyme is because I also got sick with Lyme back in around 1991 when I was living in Niagara Falls. Fancy that. And I started realizing my brain was going. I got severe brain fog. I couldn't function anymore. And I lost weight. And that's when I started going into environmental medicine. And all the environmental things I did to learn about it, I got way, way better. But I found my patients got better faster than I did, and that's when it took me about another 10 years to realize I actually had Lyme. So I started seeing a Lyme doctor in the States and going to the ILADS conferences and getting educated in the world of Lyme. And it's if you look for it and you look for the symptom constellations, you'll recognize it. It's not that hard. So we just need to educate the doctors.
Hello, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here. As a child, if you group around little boys, they often ask each other, what sort of superpower would you like? And someone says, I'd love to fly. The other says, I'd love to be able to swim like a fish. And often you'd hear the answer, I want to be invisible. And that was my answer. And, well, I got that answer. I got that wish. I got that superpower. And I got it at the hands of the medical establishment, and I got it at the hands of social structures and apparatus beyond my control. Invisibility for me looks like doctors not wanting to see me. Invisibility for me looks like Yeah, but you look so good. You look great. Invisibility for me is an insurance company following me, surveilling me. And it's kind of funny and ironic that that's what invisibility looks like. This is a situation that is deflating. This is a situation that removes my agency, removes my sense of self. I live with Lyme disease, as do many of you, and my story looks much like yours do. It's buzziness and waves of pain and achiness and immediate fatigue. It's panic. It's my body leaving my body, losing my sense of body, losing my sense of self. It's my body whispering to me, and it's my body sometimes screaming at me. It's tens of thousands of dollars, and it's confusion. And I'm feeling better these days, and it's wonderful. But I do fear what's coming. A year ago, at this time, this week, maybe this day, I had a regression that lasted the entire summer. And I'm sort of waiting for it to happen again, but I also sort of don't want to give it the agency. I don't want to give it that power. And that's why it's almost difficult to be here, because we're talking about it. But I know it's important, and I'm happy to be here. At the same time, I feel like it's a privilege to have this disease and embody it. And that's a difficult thing to say, and it's a difficult thing for many to hear. But it's a privilege for me because I can feel it. And many in my life don't. They don't understand the mental aspect of it. I deal with my body and I deal with the mental difficulties, but my wonderful partner, she doesn't get to understand what it's like. She gets to deal with the confusion and the reeling and the difficulties. And my main point here that I want to talk about is the mental aspects, the mental health, the mental difficulties, the uncertainty and the fear that comes along with illness, that comes along with doors closing and darkness, that comes along with this invisibility and solitude. It's difficult. Is it physical? Is it the Lyme? Or is it this darkness? Is it these doors closing? I don't know. I was reading a doctor who deals quite a bit in indigenous shamanic traditions, and he said our last great freedom and our last great power in our lives is to choose our perspective and choose our attitude towards things. And I've been trying to do that, and I've been working with that idea, but it's not easy. And it's time now that we don't have to choose that last freedom. It's time that we have support and there's light, there's illumination in this world of darkness that we live. When you're a kid, you also flip through the channels and you see all these older people talking in this strange room with big green chairs and screaming at each other, and you soon realize it's government happening. And for myself, I remember just passing through it, but one of the days, months ago, years ago, I can't remember now, I went onto my computer and I watched Parliament happen. And it was so emotional. It was the first time I felt solidarity and the first time I didn't feel invisible. And I was home alone and I was crying. And I was watching Elizabeth May speak. And I was watching MPs speak from all parties. And that's why we're here today, to shed light on this invisibility.
Hi, I'm Glen Barley, and I grew up in Summerland in the southern interior of British Columbia. As a kid, I spent a lot of the time in the bush with my dad, and after spending hours outside, we'd go home and pick ticks off ourselves. And the ticks were especially bad in Grand Forks, and in fact, my Aunt Beverly almost died after she was bitten by a tick there and became gravely ill with tick-borne paralysis. And the only reason she didn't die is that they found the tick in her groin, and they managed to pull it off. I was in grade 6 when I came down with a severe flu-like illness in June, with very swollen lymph nodes and an extremely swollen and arthritic right knee. Doctors had no idea what was wrong with me, but after that, my health was never the same. Over the years, I had migrating arthritis, tinnitus, a chronic sore neck, swollen joints, problems with my short-term memory, extreme fatigue, and a host of other symptoms that would wax and wane for no apparent reason. I managed to get by until I was hit by a car about 20 years ago, and then my symptoms intensified to the point that I couldn't sit through a university class without falling asleep, or even unscrew a jar lid because my arthritis was so painful. I had no idea what was wrong with me, and neither did any of the doctors I saw. Fortunately, at this point, someone said it sounded like I had Lyme disease, and I'd never heard of that. And at that time, I was lucky enough to be referred to one of the few Lyme-literate doctors in Canada. And after a thoughtful 2-hour examination, he clinically diagnosed me, as he's supposed to do, with Lyme disease. However, he retired shortly thereafter, and I was left to fend for myself, meeting doctor after doctor who said we don't have Lyme disease in British Columbia, and Lyme disease is a disease du jour. And sadly, my story isn't unique. In our patient support group in Vancouver, we have a member who, while hiking on the West Coast Trail, developed a bullseye rash in his belly button, a person who, while camping in Nelson, came down with a severe case of summer flu after being bitten by a tick, my office mate who became ill with chronic fatigue after camping at Point Paley National Park, and my best friend, a veterinarian who became sick after doing waterfowl surveys in Manitoba and getting covered in black-legged ticks. Every one of these patients was denied treatment through our medical system because they tested negative on our flawed blood tests, despite being bitten by ticks and displaying classic Lyme disease symptoms. No doctor had the courage or knowledge to diagnose them clinically as recommended by Health Canada. As an aside, I'd like to say a few words about the blood test. Lyme disease is a borreliosis infection. In BC, we have 3 known novel strains of Borrelia, plus Borrelia hermsii and likely Borrelia miyamotoi. Yet the blood tests used on patients in BC don't have the ability to pick up any of those strains. Dr. Nick Ogden with Health Canada has acknowledged that the genetic diversity of Borrelia in Canada could have consequences for disease severity, clinical symptoms, as well as the performance of diagnostic tests. Yet doctors across Canada still erroneously insist these tests are 100% accurate post 6 weeks of infection. As a result of lack of care, patients have had to become health advocates. In BC, we formed the Vancouver Lyme Disease Support Group over 10 years ago. We've held rallies, put on educational seminars, spoken to politicians, given media interviews, and worked relentlessly to raise awareness about Lyme disease. After 5 years of activism, I decided to file an FOI, and that's a Freedom of Information request, and you're entitled to documents that governments don't want you to see. And I filed that FOI with the BC government regarding their management of Lyme disease. What I discovered was that they'd commissioned a secret confidential report written by Dr. Brian Schmidt, who at that time was a senior vice president with the Provincial Health Services Authority. And what his report found was staggering, and I'm quoting here. The majority of GPs lack knowledge about Lyme disease. Testing is poor. Better testing is needed to prevent progression to a chronic disease. There's no treatment for Lyme disease patients, especially chronic Lyme disease patients in BC. The true incidence of Lyme disease in BC is unknown, and the current state of diagnostic methods for chronic Lyme and other related infections is inadequate, and that was their own expert. Within 24 hours of the report being made public and given wide media coverage, the BC government announced the complex chronic disease program would be established with the primary purpose of treating chronic Lyme disease. The program opened in 2013, but it became apparent quickly that patients weren't being treated for an infection unless they tested positive on flawed blood tests, even though the clinic says the diagnosis of Lyme disease should be a clinical one. If patients were lucky enough to test positive, treatment was severely limited, despite the fact that there are scores of recent scientific papers showing persistence of infection past the standard 3-week course of antibiotics recommended by the IDSA. Not surprisingly, doctors began to leave the clinic. And with one brave doctor going public with her concerns saying, quote, "I am one of the doctors who left the clinic because we were unable to adequately test and treat Lyme disease." Lyme disease is exploding across the country, and we need to develop a meaningful plan to deal with that. Right now, we are at a fork in the road. Will we continue to defend the status quo and deny Lyme disease patients the diagnosis and treatment they desperately need? Or will we recognize that we can do far better and move past dogma and entrenched positions to embrace new science, improve diagnostic and treatment practices, and work in true partnership with patients? The choice is ours, so let's choose wisely. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Sadie Barnett, and I would like to start off by saying thank you for sharing your experiences here today. I know it's not easy. I was bit by a tick 4 years ago while working at CFB Petawawa, my hometown, performing landscaping duties as a summer student. I was diagnosed with clinical late-stage Lyme disease 9 months ago. When I first started preparing this speech, I started writing about my myriad of agonizing symptoms, my neurological deterioration, and the hardships that I endured with doctors and specialists. I realized I was writing like I had to defend myself. How sad that that is my conditioned response. So let me be brief. I am suffering, my quality of life is diminishing, I am not receiving treatment, I am scared, and I am angry. I began my master's in public health at Lakehead University before receiving my diagnosis, and one of my professors said something that truly resonated with me. We are not here to teach you about the healthcare system. We are here to teach you how to critically appraise the policies and programs, especially within the context of the social determinants of health. And I hope that is what is going to be done at this conference. I cried of happiness the day I was diagnosed. I finally knew what was wrong with me, and according to all the regulatory body websites, it was just a quick dose of antibiotics and I would have my life back. I had no idea that I was about to embark on a controversial medical journey from hell. To summarize, my referral was denied by infectious disease after a 6-month wait. I was accused of essentially making up my symptoms and told that there was nothing clinically wrong with me, despite having many clinical manifestations. It's funny what the term Lyme will do to your credibility. But still, I found myself continuously defending our healthcare system until now. Until now, when I have exhausted all options available to me. My story is not an isolated incident. We are talking about a shared experience across the nation, affecting thousands of Canadians. And let's once again not ignore the biggest elephant in the room, that across the globe, people are being treated successfully for late-stage Lyme disease. Are we going to be the country that lags behind? Or are we going to take the opportunity to become leaders and put an end to the undue financial burden placed on Lyme disease sufferers who have to resort to medical tourism? When an individual is studying the ins and outs of the Canadian healthcare system, can't even navigate their way through that system, or get a proper diagnosis or treatment of an infectious disease, we should be shaking our heads. How many Canadian lives have been wasted? How many more need to be wasted? Stop wasting my life. My life has value and it has meaning. Stop viewing me as a statistic or a burden. It is often said that history repeats itself and that people fear the unknown. How true these statements are when it comes to Lyme disease. HIV, mental illness, both have faced stigmatization from the medical community, and those afflicted have been subjected to marginalization, all because we did not have a clear understanding of those conditions at that time. Now we can't even believe we once treated those people in the way that we did, or that we believed the initial evidence-based claims about those conditions. It is my hope that very soon the stigmatization of Lyme disease will be another lesson learned in public health and occupy the paragraph of a textbook rather than another newspaper article, blog entry, or parliamentary bill. I would like to remind everyone of a very important document called the Canada Health Act. In it, Chapter 17 highlights the 2 primary federal objectives. 1, to ensure that every Canadian has timely access to all medically necessary health services, regardless of his or her ability to pay for those services. And 2, to ensure that no Canadian suffers undue financial hardship as a result of having to pay healthcare bills. These objectives are certainly not being met when it comes to Lyme disease sufferers. You will find that many people speaking of their experiences here today are not claiming to know the solution. We're just here to tell you that it's simply not working. We have one of the greatest healthcare systems in the world and a public health agency that protects the lives of Canadians on a daily basis. But to continue to be great, we need to be continuously questioning and investigating our methods, especially when there is an overwhelming amount of people suffering. Suffering physically, suffering emotionally, and suffering financially. This conference is allowing the members of the Lyme disease community, the Public Health Agency of Canada, and all relevant stakeholders the chance to take 2 steps forward. Let's not take 1 step back. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for sharing your stories. My name is Beverly Bateman. I live in Toronto, where I have a family, and I'm the owner of a small animal veterinary clinic. I've had experience with Lyme as a patient myself, as a patient advocate in Ontario, and also through my professional work as a veterinarian. My personal health story is similar to many of those that you've already heard tonight. I believe I was infected with Borrelia when traveling in 1996, but was not diagnosed with Lyme and other tick-borne illnesses until 15 years later in 2012, by which point my symptoms were life-altering. Prior to my diagnosis, I spent countless years seeing endless specialists in Toronto, Guelph, and Ottawa with no results. In the end, my diagnosis came from a doctor in the United States, and treatment with antibiotics worked immediately to start to reverse the symptoms. I was lucky enough to find the answer, and this restored my ability to function as a wife, mother to 2 boys, and a small business owner. In thinking about how to approach this tonight, I decided I'd focus on 2 perspectives that might be different from those brought forth by other patients. The first is a comment that arises out of advocacy work that I do with a group called the Ontario Lyme Alliance. Through this, I've had the opportunity to attend meetings with healthcare professionals and health policymakers in Ontario. Personally, it seems to me as though health practitioners and the health policy teams are overwhelmed by the complexity of Lyme disease and the controversies surrounding testing and treatment. Admittedly, it's a very complicated issue. Lyme is difficult to diagnose due to the variety of symptoms. There are limited options for testing a patient. Once the diagnosis is made, treatment and patient management are an area of contention, and they likely will be for a number of years. However, and again, this is my personal opinion, it seems as though policymakers are unwilling to tackle the task. I try to think of this in the same way I might approach a complicated patient in my animal hospital, an animal with multiple issues. The key to managing a complicated problem is to work systematically through all of the issues while balancing which may be the most important at any given time. I hope that this conference and the creation of a national framework will allow us to break the issues surrounding Lyme into manageable chunks. Our medical community needs to look at up-to-date research and protocols that work for patients, and they need to create programs to assess testing and treatment methods from around the world. Although it's complicated, it needs to be done. The second perspective I wanted to bring you this evening arises from working with the issue of tick-borne illnesses and Lyme disease professionally through my work as a veterinarian in Toronto. Although my veterinary clinic is in the center of Toronto, which is a tick-free area, we have been performing routine screening of dogs for exposure to Borrelia and other tick-borne illnesses since 2010. Each year, approximately 2% of our dog population is positive for new exposure to the bacteria that causes Lyme. If we see clinical signs of concern in these dogs, we will initiate treatment, and we see good responses. My veterinary colleagues and I are on one group on the front line of this issue in Canada. Policymakers need to look at how to utilize the information coming from pets or livestock in areas with ticks. The other key point to make is that there's a big difference right now between the vets and the human health practitioners, and that's the number of resources, good resources about Lyme, available to each group. I have access to training tools about ticks and Lyme for my clinic team and clients. I have ample opportunities for continuing education on this topic. I have algorithms to help me when I see a dog with a tick or have a patient with a positive Lyme antibody test. And I have the professional latitude to treat a patient as I see fit after consultation with that pet's owner. I know the veterinarians do not have this issue figured out correctly, but at least we're working together to educate each other, educate the pet owners, and we're discussing the issue in a uniform way with adjustments over time as information changes through research. So the question I'll leave this group with is one that's come out of my experiences and one that I've repeated many times during these meetings in Ontario, and that is, why is it that in many jurisdictions in Canada, dogs are being cared for better with respect to Lyme disease than the people are? That is the reality, and we need to change it. It needs to happen systematically and quickly before more and more Canadians are too sick to recover from this illness. Thank you.